Like other battles we've been through, we intend to face this one head on. But this one's a much more personal fight.
After almost a decade of fighting for the community, launching public attack after attack on James Hardie, and struggling against the effects of pleurisy, emphysema, pneumonia and asbestosis, Bernie Banton entered Concord Hospital on August the 21st. This was to be his private struggle against one of the worst types of stomach cancer, mesothelioma. It was a struggle he could never win.
Mesothelioma is virtually always asbestos associated, and that's one of the reasons this clinical presentation with fluid in the abdomen that we call ascites, in Bernie's case, because of his known asbestos exposure, that's the most likely diagnosis, and that's what the pathology to date looks like, but we're always cautious people and we want to confirm that 100% to make sure we're not missing something else.
Is it rare what he has?
The incidence rate of peritoneal mesothelioma is about 1 in a million.
1 in a million, the chances of having this fatal disease. But Bernie Banton was already a special Australian, indeed, 1 in a million.
The families of these victims are not going to go away because we're just going to keep in their place.
No amount of money gives you your health back, but at least it gives security to the ones that are left behind.
He burst upon the nation's consciousness and intruded on James Hardie's conscience as the campaign gathered momentum to make sure that the asbestos manufacturer provided a fund big enough to compensate the many thousands of people who would suffer and die from exposure to asbestos fibres. With his oxygen bottle at his side, Bernie was the human, rational face of the biggest legal battle for justice we've known.
It really is an awareness program that we started, and whilst I would certainly never have wanted to go down this road, it still is getting the message out there of just what a silent killer asbestos is. And it won't peak until 2020, when another 53,000 people by 2020 will be diagnosed with an asbestos-related disease, and 13,000 of those people will die of mesothelioma.
Bernie's own descent into medical hell began simply enough in 1968, when he started work at Hardie's factory at Camellia in Western Sydney, shaping blocks of asbestos into lagging for power stations.
It was known as the worst factory that James Hardie had in Australia. Because of the product we were manufacturing was called K13, and the end product of it is a very dry product. It's pressed in a mould and then dried through a kiln and then cut up and shaped, and so it's a very, very dry product which creates enormous amounts of dust. And this factory was just full of dust. We were known as the snowmen, because when you finished a shift, you'd get the air hose and you'd blow the dust off. All you could see was your eyes. We were known as the snowmen.
We're talking almost 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Did anybody understand then that there were dangers in working with asbestos?
There were lots of people knew, but lots of people deliberately hid the truth.
Did you know?
No, we didn't know that it would kill you. We knew that it wasn't good for you, but we never knew that it would kill you.
What precautions did anybody take?
None. There were no masks. The precautions were you were given 2 half pints of milk to drink, and you were given leather gloves.
For 4 years, Bernie worked in an environment where asbestos dust blew across the factory floor and through offices. There's hardly anyone left alive to tell that story.
Well, there was 137 worked there. There's 9 of us left.
Of those who've died, you know how many died of asbestosis?
Well, we don't know how many, but, you know, the majority would have died of an asbestos-related disease,
When did the alarm bells...
including my brother Ted.
Well, exactly. Your brother, and you've had another brother who's been sick.
Yes, he's got asbestosis, and if you could say he's lucky, because he hasn't moved for the last 15 years. He's had 30% asbestosis for 15 years, which in my case didn't happen. I just progressed onto 100% in no time at all.
When did the alarm bells start to ring for you and everybody else that worked there? When did you realise that something was wrong?
Well, really, once I left there, I never really gave it much thought. The factory closed down in '78, but see, Hardy's greed knew no bounds. In 1970, the other companies that were producing asbestos products, like the Wonderlicks, the CSR, BHP, all of these companies, including the Australian government that used it through the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, all of these people stopped using asbestos products in 1970. James Hardie, through their greed, continued. They had 100% of the Australian market for another 17 years. Now, they could never say they didn't know. The first registered death of an asbestos-related disease was in 1898.
So they should have known all along of the dangers.
Look, you know, I read that in Asbestos House, the book, that people like me shouldn't say Hardy's knew, that I should say they should have known. Well, that's just bunkum to me, because they knew. We've read minutes where they tried to hide the truth.
It was almost 30 years later that Bernie realised something wasn't quite right, and he joined the list of those to seek and receive compensation.
Pay the victims now! Shame, Hardy, shame!
In '98, I was down on the snowfields, and my darling and I were all kitted up, ready to go skiing. I'd never been skiing. And we got up there and I said, "Dal, I can't breathe." She said, "What do you mean you can't breathe?" I said, "Dal, I'm really having trouble breathing." And, you know, we just paid all this money. So my darling, I tell you, was less than impressed that I said, "I'm going to sit this out." And I went down and sat down. And for the 5 days, I didn't do any skiing at all. I didn't attempt to do any. And we came back to Sydney and I was fine. And I didn't do anything about it. That was in the July. The following January, there was a chap I'd met at King's, a fellow named Peter Marshall. And he kept saying to me, "Bernie, I know you're from somewhere." And now looking back, I think, what a dodo I was that I didn't put two and two together. But he invited us to his house for a New Year's Eve party, which we went to, and his mum walked in the room. Well, we met about halfway, in tears. Then I realised who the Marshalls were. The Marshalls, Cole Marshall had died some 8 years earlier. He was my shift foreman. And Peter Marshall, his son.
This interview in his home is the last Bernie gave. He and I knew he had only weeks to live. Yet his was a spirit that could never be broken, resilient still as he relived the battle to make sure Hardy's provided a compensation fund vast enough to take care of a whole generation whose health would be wrecked by even a single fibre of asbestos.
Bob Carr called the Commission of Inquiry. Now, you know, lots of people have lots of things to say about Bob Carr. I have this to say. Thank you, Bob, because without your absolutely unwavering support, we would never have got this deal done. Bob Carr gave me an understanding and shook my hand and said, Bernie, you have my 100% commitment, we will get this done. And I will not be talking to Meredith until the deal is done. And to his eternal credit, that's what happened. He did not speak to Hardy's, and he was berated for it, especially by Alan Jones, who had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. But he was listening to the spiel from Hardy's. And they are the greatest liars that I have ever had the misfortune to deal with.
You really feel that passionately about
Oh,
Hardy's?
absolutely.
Is it hatred?
No, I don't hate anybody. And I've forgiven them. For what they did, I've forgiven them. I'm at peace, and I needed to reach that point where I had to forgive these people.
But they just kept on stalling the whole way,
Oh,
didn't
they did.
They found every excuse.
They found every excuse. And, you know, to watch Meredith get up there every day with the same lines was just a disgrace to humanity. And I said it on so many occasions. You know, they were so red and rosy on the outside, but they were absolutely rotten to the core. They were absolutely a disgrace to humanity. But through it all, we had some wonderful people. You know, that Commission of Inquiry found that what Hardy's did was legal. Well, I maintain that if that was legal, the laws need to be changed. Because what they did was pack up their tent in the middle of the night and run away. And say they were going to leave this massive fund of 1.9 billion half-paid shares here in Australia for all future liabilities, where they already had the train full of water, full of coal, stoked up, ready to run, to cancel those shares, which they did within less than 12 months. So, you know, all these things were a deliberate ploy to rid themselves of their asbestos liabilities. And because they were functioning so well in America, and we're grateful that they're functioning well in America, because had they not, all their cleverness in moving offshore has supplemented the fund that is now available to victims.
The original James Hardy scheme allowed for a compensation fund of $293 million. After the Commission of Inquiry and the campaign by Bernie and the trade union movement, that fund was finally settled at $4.5 billion, 16 times as great. All along, Bernie took the advice of his lawyer, Tanya Segalov.
He's someone who believed passionately in the rights of victims through what he saw, and he saw so many people he worked with die. He saw members of his own family who worked at the factory die, and he was determined to do whatever he could to help victims. I sat with him at the Commission of Inquiry, and he was genuinely felt it was disgraceful what the company was doing, and all his anger and all his vitriol was genuine, and he wanted to do what he could to, it all came from the heart, and it was all genuine.
You know, Hardy's tried and tried and tried, and there was one particular fella that I still loathe today. His name's Peter Hunt. He's less than human, because all he ever wanted to do was talk about numbers And I used to say to him, how dare you reduce us to numbers? We're victims and their families. And I took great delight in hammering him every time he opened his mouth. And thankfully I got him moved from that position of authority. He was a disgrace. I still feel so... It churns me inside to think how these people approach this whole thing and the disgraceful amounts of money that these people were being paid. Just a disgrace to humanity.
And through all this battle, some 6, 7 years, you were becoming progressively more sick yourself, and it must have been taking a terrible drain on your body, your emotions.
Well, it certainly did that. I'll never forget coming home one night and young Dean said to me, "You got to realise, I mean, these were full-on negotiations across the table with people that, you know, you really loathed being in the same building, let alone in the same room as them." And he said to me, "Dad, just remember this. Mum and I aren't Hardys." And I tell you, that really struck a chord with me. I was bringing so much of that angst home with me that I had to dust it off before I got in the door. That I was loved here. It wasn't a one-on battle, but it was very tough financially, and look, there were so many. Without the support of my darling, who has just been wonderful through all of this, you know, we could go down and tick off the people that have been so supportive. It just...
Just thank you to all of you for your support through all the James Hardie saga, and we of course are all devastated, but we all know what a fighter Bernie is, and we very much know that you will respect our privacy from here on and give us all a bit of time out, especially Bernie, to really fight this and focus on keeping as well as he can.
Bernie Banton's crusade brought him in touch with a cross-section of Australian society, the powerful and the helpless. He was awarded the AM. When a settlement was finally reached with Hardie's, the New South Wales Parliament gave him a standing ovation. And the city of Parramatta found a bridge that could bear his name.
Thank you so much. This is an unbelievable honour, and we're very humbled by it.
Bernie Banton, they named a bridge after me in Parramatta. A kid born in Parramatta to have a civic reception in Parramatta for me. I mean, to get an AM, to be the senior Australian of the Year for New South Wales for 2007. I mean, these are things that I would never ever, to have met the Prime Minister at the Lodge, to have met the Governor-General at Yarralumla. And I mean, it's truly amazing, the people that I have met.
Bernie, where did you get the strength from to carry this battle all the way through?
Well, I have a faith. I have faith in God, and I believe that He gave me the words, because people have said, you know, where did you get all those quotes from? Who used to write your material? Well, nobody did. They were just inspired words that came. Bob Carr used to say to me, Bernie, he said, I'd have all my beautifully prepared notes, and he said, I'd turn around and I'd say, you hear a few words from Bernie. He said, and you'd just step up there and give him a short, sharp, verbal joust. And he said, it was something that was on the news that night. He said, you learn very quickly what the media wants. They want something short that they can use in their news bulletin.
So did you take a lot of comfort and strength from your faith, from a Christian faith?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My word, I did. Without that, we wouldn't have had the strength to pull through.
Throughout it all, Bernie had belief. He had faith that he could overcome his illness, until he learned in the middle of 2007 that on top of everything else, he had mesothelioma.
I've ended up with this triple whammy. Well, you heard Dr. Stephen Clark say 1 in a million.
Even in the last stages of his disease, Bernie continued to fight for the community, and he took great pride in knowing that an asbestos disease research institute is to be built on the Concord Hospital campus.
Alongside the ANZAC Research Institute is a building going up which will be the Asbestos Research Institute Centre. This will be a world-class centre, and I'm just so thrilled to be associated with it. This is where the most asbestos was used in the whole of Australia. There were more people used asbestos in New South Wales than any other state.
And there'll be people out there now, people watching this, listening to you, who are going to be affected by asbestosis
right.
and don't even know it now.
That's right, and that's why this awareness program is out there, to let people know just how dangerous one fibre can kill. Now people say, oh, that's alarmist. Yes, it is alarmist, but it's the truth. There is no scientist in the world that can tell you a safe exposure level to asbestos. And it's as simple as that.
Bernie took precious time out in the election campaign to embarrass Health Minister Tony Abbott into approving the drug Alinta for the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, believing genuinely it was his responsibility to do what he could to benefit others.
This is just so important that fellow Australians get a fair go to have this Alinta treatment.
Look, there's been lots of people that said lots of very kind things about me. And look, you know, in life, I believe God gives you the opportunity to shine or to hide your bushel. Well, I chose to shine. And I was given the opportunity to do something for my fellow Australians. And I was just thrilled to be given that opportunity.
He'll have an incredible sense of achievement, but I think he also is frustrated that he doesn't feel his job was done. He feels he still had so much to give, and he was relatively young and he wanted to do more. So I think part of him is angry and frustrated, but there are a lot of people who love him and have been beside him and will be beside him.
Bernie Banton was a humble man who loved his wife, his 5 children and his grandchildren. He was only 61. He should have had many more years to live. Yet he made the most of the talents he was given, chief among them love for his fellow man and an ability to communicate that message. Bernie Banton had fought a bitter struggle, yet he faced death with peace in his heart.
I have a faith that, you know, I'm not in charge. God's in charge, and you know, it's. I find it pretty hard to argue that if you believe that you're going somewhere far better, it's pretty hard to argue. Why would you want to stay here and suffer pain and all the rest of it when, if you believe in your heart, you're going somewhere better? Sure, you know, it's going to be hard to leave family and friends and all of that, but I just have a peace, an inner peace, that, you know, if that's what's going to happen, well, so be it. I'm not in charge. God's in charge. Simple as that.